Hey everyone, welcome back. We have an amazing talk coming up by Chinasa Okolo called The Limits of Global Inclusion in AI Development. So I'll start with an introduction of Chinasa. Chinasa T. Okolo is a third year PhD student in the Department of Computer Science at Cornell University. Her research leverages recognition techniques and computer vision to improve mobile healthcare in low resource regions for the rapid diagnosis of infectious and tropical diseases. She also works on research projects to analyze the applications, implications, and perceptions of AI enabled healthcare deployed throughout the global South and North. Chinasa co-organizes the Mechanism Design for Social Good Working Group on development, where she leads collaboration and discussion amongst the practitioners and academics to understand and tackle issues pertaining to the role of technology in emerging nations and under-resourced settings. Her work has been supported by funding from the National GEMS Consortium, Oracle Corporation, and the North American Network Operators Group. Chinasa holds a bachelor's degree in computer science from Pomona College and has previously interned at Microsoft Research in Cambridge, England, where she developed computational models and domain-specific computational tools for bacterial quorum sensing. Everybody welcome Chinasa.
All right. Thank you all so much and for the great introduction. I'm super happy to be here. So also, I want to definitely acknowledge my fabulous co-authors who helped greatly with this, I would say, the paper that I will be presenting today. And also, just wanted to note to the audience that I would love for y'all in the Q&A session to ask as many questions as you want to, specifically about things maybe outside of academia. And so, yeah, I'll get started. All right. So we see that the arm of global inequality is long. It's rendering itself visible, especially in the development of artificial intelligence, also known as AI. In an analysis of publications at two major machine learning conference venues, NeurIPS, which used to be called NIPS, and ICML, both that occurred in 2020, we found that of the top 10 countries in terms of publication index, none of them were located in Latin America, Africa, or Southeast Asia. And and thinking about a couple of years ago, we actually never really saw any publications in these top conference venues from the African continent at all. And so although we see that, just conference publications are just one metric, they remain the predominant medium in which the progress of AI is disseminated. And such, this serves as a signal as to who is generating research within this field. Again, we see that current global inequality in AI development, it involves both a concentration of profits and a danger of ignoring the context of AI to which it is applied. And so as we see, as these systems become increasingly integrated into society, we see that those responsible for developing and implementing such systems stand to profit to a large extent. And this has a possibility to exacerbate existing inequities throughout the global South and the world at large. In this work, we focus on implications of participation for global inequality, focusing particularly on the limitations in which inclusion in AI development is practiced throughout the global South. We'll look specifically at how this plays out in the domains of data sets and research labs, and conclude with a discussion of opportunities for improving the power imbalance in AI development. First off, our paper was motivated by the theme of power, not just inclusion. We believe that more focus should be placed on the redistribution of power rather than just on the inclusion of underrepresented groups in the active development of AI systems. First off, we'll talk a bit about data sets. And so we see that given the centrality of large amounts of data in today's machine learning systems, there appears to be a substantial opportunity for inclusion in both the data collection and labeling process. However, we see that data collection is a practice that is wrought with problems of inclusion and representation. We see that first, two large publicly available image data sets, ImageNet, which is, I would say, the standard for computer vision in the field, and also Open Images, are both US and Eurocentric. So what this means is that work by Shankar et al. Argues that this model trained on the data sets, they perform much worse on images for the global South. For example, weddings don't look the same all over the world. And so we see that images of grooms are classified with a lower accuracy when they come from countries such as Ethiopia or Pakistan compared to grooms from Western countries like the United States and or the UK. Again, So along this vein, other work done by DeVries et al. Shows that, images of the same words, such as weddings or spices or even just food in general, look very different when they are asked or queried in different languages as they present differently in different cultures. Again, we see that, these object recognition data sets, they fail to, models themselves actually fail to correctly classify many of these kinds of images or objects when they come from the global south and other in these regions. We believe that a representative data set is crucial to allowing models to learn how certain objects and concepts are represented in different cultures, and is important for equal representation in society and throughout machine learning, AI as a whole. So the data collection and labeling market is expected to grow to 6.5 billion USD by 2027, according to Grandview Research. While Cognlytica, another market research firm, estimates that over 80% of the machine learning development process consists of data preparation tasks such as collection, cleaning, and labeling. We see that large tech companies such as Uber and Alphabet, which is a parent company of Google, rely heavily on these services while paying millions of dollars monthly for these respective services. We see that the importance of data labeling and machine learning research has led to the crowdsourcing of this work, which means that anonymous individuals are compensated for completing this work by labeling images or videos. And so a major venue for this work is Amazon Mechanical Turk, which hosts a significant portion of consumers from the global south, primarily located in Southeast Asia or India to be specific. Other companies such as Semasource, Scale AI, and Mighty AI also operate in the United States, but they crowdsource workers from around the world, primarily relying on low-wage workers from Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. This reliance on workers from these regions has led to a significant pay disparity between the millions in profits earned by data labeling companies and worker earnings. So for example, Semasource, a data labeling country based in the United States, they made $19 million in 2019, but we see that workers usually from that company made the equivalent of $8 a day in USD. While we know that 8 USD or just like earning in dollars, American dollars, maybe a living wage in some countries, this massive profit disparity remains despite the importance of these workers to the core business of these companies. All right, so next we're going to talk about some barriers to participation and problems with this that occur, that inhibit, populations from equitably contributing to AI. So we see that, the most obvious thing is that first off, you need a computing device and stable internet access to access a lot of these data labeling platforms. And again, we know that infrastructural, problems are present and predominantly present throughout a lot of regions in the global south, which is, the foremost barrier itself. And so we know that, goods such as, access to technology and also access to internet are highly correlated with socioeconomic status and for geographic locations. Thus, we see that this serves as a barrier for participation for many throughout the global south. Again, we know that a reliable internet connection is necessary for finding both, tasks to complete and completing those tasks, and also accessing the payment for these tasks. And again, we also see that those in the global south are, disproportionately pay more for internet access than those in the global north. And another barrier we see that is the method for payment and data labeling services on many of these platforms. For example, Amazon Mechanical Turk is a very widely used platform for finding data labelers, but they only allow payments to a US bank account or in the form of an Amazon gift card. So obviously, if you're in a country that does not have access to an Amazon, which, it's not really that common in a lot of regions throughout the global south, then obviously you'll probably not be able to join a platform and or get paid at all. And we see that these methods of payment restrict may not only be, what is desired by the worker, but they can kind of deter people from actually working for these respective platforms. All right, so going into some work about, just thinking about how AI development is highly concentrated in countries throughout the global north, we see that, this happens for a lot of reasons. And so for one, I would say that it's really just the abundance of capital that is present in these companies, but again, and also well-funded research institutions and also technical infrastructure, which really plays a significant role. And we see that, these conditions came across obviously due to the history of colonial exploitation of the global South, where we saw that, European states, they plundered labor and capital for the benefit of the, larger cities and larger countries, or, the colonies, and to the detriment of the colonized countries. And we see that, this colonization or plundering was justified because white supremacy, of course, and also, the colonized peoples were seen as uncivilized. And so, they were actually relegated, to more fit to perform physical labor at, excruciating, pains, and also at wages that were much lower than those paid to Europeans. We also, see this up until today, where, a lot of, I would say, marginalized populations, excuse me, in Western countries are, relegated to more like frontline, central worker positions, while the elite, stay at the top in their comfy jobs, obviously in these times of Corona, being able to, work from home. All right. And so again, we see that these colonized peoples, they were for the most part prevented from engaging in more lucrative businesses of insurance, banking, industry, and trading, both back then and now. And so we see that as the labor and natural capital of colonized nations became indispensable to European economies and economic projects, these institutions throughout Europe and the Western world in general capture the vast majority of this wealth, which still stands till today. So we see that current practices, they neglect consent and poorly represent areas of the global South. Image data sets, such as the ones mentioned before, like ImageNet and OpenView, are often collected without consent from the people involved, and sometimes even contain a large amount of pornographic context. While others, such as those from companies and end users, they benefit from the use of this sensitive data. And again, so work from Joe and Gebru, they suggest that we should draw from the long-held tradition of archives, when collecting data, because this is a discipline, and this should already be thinking about challenges like consent and privacy as well. And so we know that, although data is very central to the AI systems of today, data labelers should only receive a disproportionately tiny portion of the profits of building these AI systems. In parallel with colonial projects of resource extraction, such as oils, minerals, diamonds, gold, all of that, we see that, data labeling kind of mirrors this as an extraction of meaning from data, and it's no way out of a cycle of colonial dependence. So we believe that, again, obviously pay equity, improving that is a first step as well. But, companies and also just larger institutions should do more than that to, kind of mirror away from the cycle of colonial dependence that has plagued many countries in the global South for decades or even centuries. All right. So our next session, we'll talk about research labs throughout the global South and AI research labs to be more specific. And so we've seen that, this has become much more popular. Some companies have had AI research labs on the continent African continent for a couple of years, like IBM, with locations both in Nairobi, Kenya, and Johannesburg, South Africa. But we've, I would say, a more prominent lab that came recently was Google AI Accra in Accra, Ghana, which I will talk about very shortly. And so as the ascendance of AI becomes more important to the bottom lines of many large tech companies, we believe that industrial research labs have spun out that focus solely on artificial intelligence and its respective applications. And so companies from Google to Amazon to Snapchat have doubled down in this field and have opened up labs leveraging AI for web search, language processing, video recognition, voice applications, and much more. And I do want to note that out of the companies I just mentioned, only Google has research labs in the global South, and India, throughout Africa, and I think throughout South America as well. But Amazon and Snapchat have not gone into these realms as well. And another important part is that we see that these, research labs are also focusing on, very important, I would say, problems throughout the global south, such as agriculture, healthcare, and education. We do see that within Africa, there's a very large focus on agriculture and climate, which makes a lot of sense just because, as the continent, begins to or continues to industrialize, this will be a huge area that for potential gain, both, in wealth and also in knowledge creation as well. All right. So we see that, as AI becomes increasingly integrated into the livelihoods of consumers around the world, tech companies have recognized the importance of democratizing AI development and moving it outside the bounds of the global north. Of 5 notable companies that develop AI solutions, such as Google, Microsoft, IBM, Facebook, and Amazon, we see that out of these 5, 3, Google, Microsoft, and IBM have research labs in the global south, and all either have development centers, customer support centers, and or data centers within these regions. And just to bring a big point about data centers, these are things where locations where data is actually processed, and so in terms of I would say Europe more specifically or the EU, this has become very important just because of privacy regulations that have sprung about because of GDPR. There are major privacy I would say law or set of regulations, and so as privacy regulations and also policies form to I would say understand and enforce regulations surrounding data, the use of data from I guess consumers within these respective countries throughout the global south. I believe that data centers will become a bit more common. So we see that as the opening of data centers and AI research labs in the global south, they may appear beneficial at first for the local workforce, but however, these positions, they require technical expertise, which the local population may not have. So again, we kind of see the same mirroring of colonial, dependence, or I would say colonial mentalities in the, I would say the outsourcing, or I would say the intrusion of technical talent into these regions. And so we believe that, while the local populations may not have enough talent, we see that this introduces opportunities for displacement from those from the global north who have more access to specialized training needed both to develop, maintain, and deploy AI systems. And again, I think this speaks more broadly to the educational sector in a lot of countries in the global south, just because many scholars are dependent on Western institutions for higher education, or I would say postgraduate education as well. And so given the unequal distribution of AI development globally, it's very common for AI researchers and practitioners to both work and study in places outside of their home countries, i.e. outside of the global south. For example, pictured here is Mustafa Sis. He's actually the current director of Google AI Accra. He's originally from Senegal, but he was recruited to Google from Facebook AI Researcher Fair, where he was working in Menlo Park, California. And a new lab that actually recently opened up in Nairobi, Kenya, for Microsoft Research. The director of that lab was actually recruited from Microsoft Research India, but before then, she was a research scientist at Xerox in France, and I believe that she's from France or another country within Europe as well. All right. And so we see that as several companies have established research facilities across the world and in the global south, we believe that these efforts remain insufficient at addressing long-term problems within the AI ecosystem. A recent report from Georgetown University's Center for Security and Emerging Technologies, also known as CSET, they describe the establishment of AI labs by US companies, such as Facebook, Google, IBM, and Microsoft abroad. And so this report notes that both that 68% of the 62 AI labs of these companies are located outside of the US, but actually 68% of the staff of the same actual number, 68, are located within the United States. So we noticed that this leads to about the international research labs or offices of these respective companies having about half the employee population compared to the average, on average, related to the domestic US locations. And so we see that, in terms of improving how the local workforce can be involved in, AI development, or just, I would say, technology development throughout the global South in general, there is a general strategy that is usually taken upon by, companies or larger institutions. And so we see that the general strategy of partnering with existing institutions, such as, I would say, universities, and or acquiring startups and the formation of AI labs outside the United States, it has the potential to reinforce existing inequities by investing in locations with already thriving tech ecosystems. And so one notable, I would say, exception to this is Google's investment into infrastructure, skills training, and startups within Ghana. This was talked about by Victor Asamoah, who is a very large VC venture capital investor throughout the African continent. And so we find that, we believe that a long-term investment and planning in the global South can form both the stepping stones for broadening AI to include underrepresented and marginalized communities. And so, but even so, with this long-term investment into regions in the global South, we believe there's a couple of questions that still remain, where, is there actually enough opportunities for residents to be engaged? Because I would say one, again, there are the barriers to participation that I described earlier, such as internet access, and also, just access to having a suitable device to, learn how to code, or even learn, like, I guess, online digital marketing skills. That still is a hurdle for many people. And so we see that there is a very large gap in these countries between both, I would say, the lower class and the middle class, and this continues to widen, as inequities continue to further on. And so going back into, I would say, the tech companies or institution or research labs themselves, we see that it may not really be, I would say, it's still hard to tell whether local residents are provided enough opportunities to actually join management and contribute to important strategic decisions. Just mainly, again, speaking on to how, these AI research labs are actually staffed in the first place. And so it's super popular from maybe, let's say, like a senior manager from, I guess, like Google or Facebook in the US to, maybe like take a chance on, going to India or, Kenya for a year or so to help establish a lab. And so, oftentimes they stay and we don't really see these opportunities given to local AI talent as well. And so we believe that true inclusion in AI, especially at the industry level, necessitates that underrepresented voices can be found in all ranks of a company's hierarchy, including both positions of lower and upper management. And also, if this is taken advantage of, this ability will be critical to ensuring that the benefits of AI apply not only to technical problems that arise in the global South, but to socioeconomic inequalities which persist around the world. And so I'll talk about this a bit later in the presentation, but we believe that improving inclusion in AI and also just in technical development or engagement as well can be seen as a way to improve economic development throughout many regions in the global South, and particularly within sub-Saharan Africa. All right. And so going, thinking about more of the opportunities that are rising throughout for AI, both and also just like technology development as well, we see that while in the face of global inequality in AI development, we see a few promising opportunities, both from, I would say, large tech companies who are, forming initiatives to help, I would say, train the local workforces, and also from grassroots organizations that are, directly working with people to improve both representation in academia and industry as it relates to the development and deployment and use in general of AI. All right. So going back into some grassroots efforts. And so I would say over the past 5 years or so, we've seen just an explosion of so many great organizations that have committed to improving representation and inclusion within the field of AI. And so the emergence of grassroots efforts by these organizations to ensure that indigenous communities are actively involved and stakeholders of AI has increasingly been strong. So Black in AI, a nonprofit organization with worldwide membership, was founded to increase the global representation of Black identifying students, researchers, and practitioners in the field of AI. And they have made significant improvements in increasing the number of Black scholars attending and publishing in NeurIPS, which is a premier AI conference, and other conference venues such as ICLR and ICML as well. And so I actually would love to speak a bit more about Black in AI. I'm very fortunate to have, been involved with them as like both, I would say a participant and also, volunteer from the very start. And so I actually was able to attend, I would say my second AI conference because of them, and have been able to present, at many subsequent conferences further on. And more other important work they're doing. They actually started, I would say, an academic initiative about 2 years or so ago to help improve graduate representation, AI representation at the graduate levels. And so they have a very active mentor program. I think if I recall last time, maybe around like 500 mentors or so from around the world, who are helping students, a lot of them actually based on the African continent to help get them involved with machine learning and AI and into prestigious institutions, throughout, mainly located in the global north or so, but, throughout the world in general. And so another initiative they have also done, which I'll probably speak to a bit later, is that we see that it's very important for local talent of AI to kind of evolve as well. And so Black in AI has a recent initiative. They just started to learn more about AI entrepreneurship throughout Africa and also the Africa diaspora in AI. And so I believe that this is a very promising area as well. And so just in general, throughout higher education, that inclusion in AI is extremely sparse. And so going back to recent efforts by Black in AI, they've focused on instituting programming to both support members in graduate programs and also in their postgraduate careers. And then again, throughout the tenure track process of professorship in AI roles and positions, or academia positions. And other efforts such as Kipu AI, which is based in Latin America, they have been established and provide a venue to train aspiring AI researchers and advanced machine learning topics, foster collaborations, and actively participate in how AI is being used to benefit Latin America. In other communities, such as Latinx in AI or LXAI, is a much more broad, focusing on, I would say, the Latino Hispanic diaspora, and improving their representation in AI as well. And so, talking about some other communities on the African continent, we don't have them pictured here, but Data Science Africa is a very large one, and then Deep Learning Indaba also have expanded their efforts. They've established conferences, workshops, different kinds of like Slack communities, and even dissertation awards. And then they're also actively developing curricula for the broader African AI community. And I would say one institution or grassroots organization I want to highlight is Masakane NLP. And so NLP is essentially natural language processing. And so I think their efforts are super important and very much needed. And they've done a lot of great work within this space to democratize, I would say, or more specifically, decolonize AI development in the NLP space. And so essentially what this means is that they're helping improve representation of more lower resource rate languages in NLP systems. And this is really important just because one, we notice that, maybe for any of you who has an accent or whose parents have maybe like a foreign accent, one that is not, Western, they fail to be recognized by these voice language systems such as Siri, Alexa, Cortana, etc. And so again, both in like English or Western languages such as English, French, Spanish, and their native languages such as for mine, which is Igbo, Hausa, Zulu, etc., Amharic, all that. And so Masakane is actively working on creating, I would say, repositories, or don't know the exact word, repositories of these native languages One, obviously, to document them, which is super important for both, computer scientists and linguists, and then also just to improve how, these languages are integrated in these AI systems or AI voice systems that I mentioned beforehand. And so their approach is also very significant because, they actively promote that they be included, as, an active participant within any kind of partnership that they pursue or any partnership that, that people want to approach them with. So I think this is a great, stance or, standard to have, as a grassroots organization focused on, the global South and sub-Saharan Africa in general. And so this will allow, others to kind of, I guess, quote unquote, like come correct in terms of, how they, both approach AI development and then also improve, true inclusion within these spaces. So we see that, a key component of AI inclusion efforts should be elevated to elevate should be done to elevate the involvement and participation of those historically excluded from technological development. We see that many startups and several governments across the global South are creating opportunities for local communities to participate in the development and implementation of AI programs and also through like entrepreneurial pathways as well. Thus, in addition to policy that improves work conditions and wages for data labelers and other, I would say low wage jobs in this space, workers should be provided with education opportunities that allow them to contribute to the models they're building in ways beyond labeling. And so kind of going into this as well, labeling really, excuse me, shouldn't be just like the basic level of inclusion. And it's really not, if you think about it as well. I think it's really more important for AI practitioners from the global South to be involved in AI development throughout the actual, I would say, deployment of these systems. And one, I believe that this is very important because just pointed to some a recent work by Google. They actually did a study where they, developed this this AI system to diagnose diabetic retinopathy, or I think that's what it is. Essentially, like it's an eye disease that occurs, or blindness that occurs due to diabetes. And so, they developed this, this fancy model in the lab, but actually when they did a field study in some clinics in Thailand, I think it was 11 clinics or so in Thailand and throughout like Southeast Asia, the system actually didn't really work that well. And of course, in the development of the system, they were able to get, such high quality images. And also there were some, I would say, images from, I think, India that they were able to include in the data set. But again, if you're working in, a fancy lab with, good lighting, good internet connectivity, you're obviously, not going to have the insight to, or the foresight, to predict, what could happen, if this, these kinds of models are deployed in systems that, or in regions that do not have these luxuries. And so, excuse me, going back to the study, we see that what happened in the deployment of these systems was that not only did this AI system for diagnosing diabetic retinopathy not really work well, even though it had very high accuracy in the lab. There were, other conditions that, complicated its development and like integration. And so one, I would say, was obviously internet connectivity. Again, machine learning models, take very large amounts of data to train. And even when integrated into maybe say like smaller devices such as mobile phones or tablets, they still require a lot of like computing power from the device itself. And then also just like, they take a lot of bandwidth. And again, pointing to I would say the point I made earlier about, the disproportionate prices that, people pay for data compared to, in the global South compared to those in the global North, this, can incur more, extraneous expenses that may be a burden for, both individuals and institutions, who might not necessarily have the funds to run these models. And another thing we saw that was just the conditions within a clinic, the clinics themselves, were not optimal for, first obtaining, good images that could be used that could be analyzed by the machine learning models that Google developed. So, there was very poor lighting conditions. And so I guess the nurses in this case were not able to foresee how, sorry, they weren't able to like take very high quality images. And so what this happened is that it was basically like a domino effect. So you don't have a high quality image anymore. And so when you input this into the model, obviously it's going to error out or maybe even produce a false result. And so again, like the implications of this, are not only deadly, just thinking about, whatever context you may be based in, whether, you're in the United States, you're in France, or you're in, Nigeria or somewhere. But I think it's a bigger impact, just mainly because, I say it takes, for regions where, there's not a lot of healthcare, there's a lack of access to healthcare, specifically in regards to like clinics or hospitals. Some people may, take a whole day off of work to travel to a hospital. And so if they get a, incorrect diagnosis, not only does this induce fear or stress, it also, prevents them from earning, maybe like another day's wages because they have to take another day off to travel just due to this erroneous result. So kind of like summarizing that point in general, we believe that inclusion beyond labeling has to also be involved. Has to also include, say, I would say like AI deployment as well, and even just like the actual design and formation of these systems. Because again, obviously, if you live in these regions, throughout the global South, you have prior context and background knowledge that a lot of these Western AI researchers do not have, which can not only save cost for these, large tech companies such as Google and Facebook, but also ensure that, marginalized populations are being equitably, I would say, addressed or included in AI solutions. All right. And again, we see that another issue that I brought about earlier was that these governments throughout the global South, they should actively encourage and foster growth of local startups in these deep emerging technologies. And so definitely, I would say this can be a hurdle just because in a lot of these economies, especially in the governments, we don't have enough specialized, I would say, politicians who actively, or policymakers who know about AI or even technology in general. And also just even in the United States, this is also an issue. And so we've seen, I would say, organizations or fellowships that have brought in experts from academia and industry into government to help both, I would say, policymakers, speed up their knowledge about AI or just technology in general, and also to help the government actually actively develop, or improve their existing systems. And so I believe that this can be a model that, it can be followed or copied into the global South. But obviously, you still want to think about, the different, colonial connotations or denotations that this may have. And also you just want to think of, be more inclusive of this. And so maybe, thinking about including academics from local universities throughout, the global South as well into government. So we believe that we suggest that you should view AI development as a path for economic development. And so it remains that very essential to both work with and assimilate technology and expertise from foreign companies. It's super imperative that domestic expertise be developed in tandem to shape both the future of AI development and to reap its large profits. And so while we see that, there's still a long way to go in true inclusion or global inclusion of AI and global development, we believe that a lot of the efforts, especially for me, I would say I'm very fond of many of the grassroots initiatives that I mentioned from like Black in AI, Kipu, and like Data Science Africa, and fostering and supporting local grown AI talent. And as these continue to grow, I think that companies should leverage these populations to help improve inclusion overall. All right. And so we see that as the development of AI continues to progress around the world, the exclusion of those from communities most likely to bear the brunt of algorithmic inequity, it only stands to worsen. And so again, I would say in terms of algorithm issues of bias and fairness in AI, this has been a very large conversation in the United States, more specifically, spearheaded by researchers such as Timna Gebru, Joy Buolamwini, and Deb Raji. And so, just to give you some insight on that, these were the women, Black women, behind Gender Shades projects, and also like subsequent projects, that examined or exposed inequity in facial recognition systems. And so their work, spurred a lot of conversations, kind of, I would say, like ignited the field of AI fairness or AI ethics as a whole. And so also do want to recognize I would say the injustices that, Tim McGebbrew and other AI researchers have experienced by Google. And so again, these are also issues that should be taken into consideration when thinking about how AI practitioners actively, try to, be ethical in their roles and against, I would say, their respective companies as well. And so we hope that the actions that we've proposed throughout this paper and also I've talked about in this presentation can help to begin the movement of communities in the global South from being just beneficiaries of, or subjects of AI systems to actually being active, engaged participants. And again, I believe that autonomy within AI is super important as well. And again, this relates to colonial mentalities where these companies have established government systems, or just I would say just infrastructural systems, and just I would say different kinds of systems where many of these the countries that were colonized are still dependent on even up to today. So for example, this reminds me of I would say like the French and like the currency, the franc, which many countries in Francophone Africa, like Central and West Africa, are like still dependent on it, but they're actively moving away from this again. So we believe that having true agency over the AI systems integrated into the livelihoods of communities in the global South will both maximize the impact of these systems and lead the way for global inclusion in AI. And just to conclude very quickly, I would love for you all to read our paper, which spurred this, this presentation, which is the limits of global inclusion in AI development. You can find it on an archive, meaning that there's no academic paywall to it. So would love for you to check it out. And we were also recently covered in VentureBeat, a top tech news website. And so would love for you all to check that out as well. All right. And so I left some time here for questions. So would love to learn more, or at least like answer any questions that you have, both about like me personally or my research. Alila, you're muted.
All right, Lita, I think you're muted.
Thank you. So I just want to say thank you so much for that talk. We really appreciate it because this work is very important. And I know especially for Blackathon, we have people from all across the African diaspora. There are people who are participants right now from like Nigeria and like Ethiopia and like other parts of Africa, South Africa. Also, so we have like a good amount of coverage right now. I believe somebody is also with us from Ghana, and yeah, and like of course people from the US and like other parts of the world. So this is very important, I think, to both us and our participants, and especially talking about the African diaspora as a whole and our role in technology, and what that looks like geopolitically also. But I did want to go into some questions that we have from the audience. There's quite a few. So Joynaya is tuning in with us from Atlanta, Georgia, and she wants to ask what motivates you to do this work.
Yeah, so I would say like this is kind of started more recently, but in terms of my research in general, I always had a passion for healthcare. Just obviously, if by my name, if you can't tell, I'm Nigerian. And so my parents, definitely pressured me a bit to kind of go into this space. But, I didn't really want to be a doctor, but I felt like computer science was a good way to still impact like medicine and other fields throughout these methods. And so just as I've progressed within computer science as a whole, obviously, my senior project in undergrad was based off the work that Joy and Timna and Deb did with Gender Shades, and actually like audited a facial recognition system myself as well. And so I think that just like seeing other Black women in this space made me a bit more interested. And then also, with my background, being directly connected to the continent, trying to understand, how is AI, equitably or not equitably, being developed for people in these regions and throughout the global south as a whole, is something that drives me. And also, like as someone who develops AI systems myself, with the goal of integrating them specifically in these regions, I also think it's very important for me to also analyze these questions as well.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for telling us that. Yeah, I could definitely tell that like you said, like to me and like Joy and Deb, like being in the field has like really influenced you and like really, I guess, given you a chance to see yourself in this field. But yeah, so Joy Naya also wants to know how we can make more representative data sets for the global south.
So for me, I think that it really starts with maybe, I guess, thinking about the existing data sets and trying to find out what is actually missing. And then even despite like not like looking at those data sets specifically, there's just a lot of stuff that's not there. So obviously like agriculture is a big thing, I know it can be a bit hard to take like, I guess, aerial images or imagery of this, but I think that, language is obviously, I feel like the easiest one to start off with, just because a lot of languages actually are not either like written, they're more oral, or they haven't like actively been documented. And even like within more popular languages throughout the continent, like for example, like Igbo, like we have so many different, I would say, dialects. And so I think it's really important for people to kind of address these problems as well. And then I guess like I'm more of a computer vision person. So I think that, images themselves, especially from the larger data sets like, ImageNet, are not really inclusive or representative of, I would say, like different styles or customs or cultures. And so like if you want to make, like a Nigerian wedding data set, like that would be something that's, super dope as well, like a Pakistani wedding data set, like that's also cool as well. So yeah.
Oh, wow, that's a good idea. Okay, so we also have a question. Okay, so I'm going to go to Key Asia's question and then come back to some of the other questions. So how do you propose we bridge the gap between research and practice? And also, I suppose the follow-up question there would be, how can we ensure the quick application of research to the communities that need them the most?
Yeah, I think the first way obviously is to just directly find these communities, especially I'll probably speak more to the African continent because I'm a bit more familiar. But again, like the grassroots communities I mentioned, like Data Science Africa, Deep Learning Indaba, and like Masakane NLP, like they're actively working on a continent to develop systems and collaborating with local institutions. And I also want to point out that there are really great universities such as like Makerere University in Uganda and University of Wits in South Africa that are doing great work and have, I would say, like premier AI research labs. And so, definitely reaching out to people that are actively based on the continent is obviously the first way to kind of, bridge this gap between research or development or like research and practice as well. So, yeah.
100%, yeah. No, they've had a lot of good stuff coming out of Macquarie. I agree. So, okay, so Kentrell Owens has a question. He says, "Hi, Chinasa. Thanks for the talk. What do you think are some good strategies for compelling US-based tech companies to have more equitable practices globally? For example, hiring locally, as you said."
I see. So obviously, I think it's really just for me, I think it's one, improving equity in terms of like pay, and also because a lot of these countries, so again like Nigeria, more than half the population lives in poverty, and so employing people within these regions is very important for, I would say, like evening, I would say, like the economic ladder or so. And then also again, and more importantly in regards to, I would say, like AI development itself, I think issues of inclusion or representation or even like fairness kind of occur just based off of we've heard this many times before of I guess like white and like East Asian researchers who have no background context into the lives of people who live in these regions. And so I think that background context and also this insight that local workers can provide in the development of AI is also important. And again, this will obviously, if your system is equitable for marginalized populations, and obviously like that is a broader like, economic area or like market area or target market you're able to address. And so again, that will lead to more profits as well. So it's both a economic and also just like a justice, I would say, motivation for this as well. So.
Oh, awesome. Okay, thank you for that. And so we have a couple more questions, so I'm going to get to those. So do you think there's a way to effectively decolonize AI, especially with Amazon playing such an important role in data collection?
Yeah. So I feel like there is, and definitely I think Amazon themselves have kind of, weeded themselves in terms out of decolonizing AI just because of their main focus on, I would say, like India and the US. And so again, pointing back to the grassroots initiatives that we see I'm just going to like point out Musakane again, because they do a lot of great work in actually, curating these language data sets. And I know there are a couple other people doing this as well. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it's just that, focus on local grassroots organizations who are already doing the work and, provide them with resources and funding to improve that, just because of course, like, these large tech companies, have a large presence, I would say, throughout, the world in general. But I feel like, these grassroots communities are more on the ground and able to directly reach out to people. And even with, NGOs, NGOs are, I would say, like nonprofits, collect a lot of data as well. And so I think that maybe helping them or finding ways to connect them with local or like global tech talent to help curate this data will also be a great source that we can find in, decolonizing, these systems.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that answer. And I appreciate the honesty inherent in it too. And so this is the last question. So somebody said, is there a way for us, this is such a good question, I love this. Is there a way for us as residents of the global north to encourage and facilitate the creation of opportunities for residents of the global south in the field of AI?
Yeah, so honestly, I think there's many different ways, but from an academia standpoint, I think that being involved as a mentor is honestly the best way that you can start, especially it's I would say like a very low cost or like low barrier way. And so like Black in AI has a mentoring program. I'm not sure if Latinx and AI has a mentoring program as well. They may. So, volunteering for these initiatives or even like reaching out to universities to say like, oh, we can like do a presentation at your university to maybe like even introduce the topic of like, what is AI or like, what is AI research to students, and even faculty may help as well. And I think, again, speaking from an academic standpoint, I think that partnerships are super important, or like collaborations. And so like going back to the point I made earlier about, a lot of the work at like, premier AI machine learning conferences coming from the global north. I think that, if you have a problem, maybe say like you're working on a problem that maybe is like directed towards, I would say like users or consumers or just populations in the global south, and you don't have anyone on your paper or like from the global south, I think that's actually a problem if you think about it. And so, again, there are large research universities within a continent that have great AI labs that have spun out and startups from them. And so trying to like collaborate in that aspect is great. And so from an industry standpoint, I don't have really much experience there, but I think again, I feel like the best thing you can do at the moment, honestly, is just like, leveraging and not exploiting the work and talent from these grassroots organizations such as like Indaba, Musakane, and like Data Science Africa to recruit engineers and then also train them and just forge meaningful partnerships is also very important as well. So yeah.
So like you're saying that like really it's about community building and coalition building, and like, okay, that makes sense. And so yeah, I feel like I had a follow-up, but
Yeah, no worries.
yeah, okay. But by the way, I would also like, I guess as I'm trying to like remember that question, I would also like to plug the paper, because you mentioned the thing about the diabetic, I think it was like retinopathy or something like that. But yeah, retina something. but I think, yeah, I would like to just plug that work about like, I think it was like low resource context or something. Isn't that what you did that as like a workshop paper? Would you mind like plugging that real quick? Because I actually loved that paper. Yeah.
Okay. I go back because I cannot remember the name at the moment. But was it the one for AI in the real world? Was it that one?
It was like in low resource context or something like that.
Just one minute. I'm just gonna check my website very quickly so I can find it.
Okay. Yeah, no, I would definitely suggest plugging that one. And also, I wanted to ask, after you find that, how people can support you and support your work.
Yeah, definitely. So there's another work. Okay, so I'll just talk about my most recent work. This was published. Well, it's going to be like appearing in CHI, which is a conference on human computer interaction. And so the top conference for that. And so I'm not sure if this is what you're talking about, Lilia, but I'm just going to plug it anyway. And so like this work, I did a virtual study in Bangalore, India last summer. It was supposed to be there, of course, but due to the pandemic, couldn't be. But this is a really interesting study because it was, I would say, from our knowledge, the first to examine how community health workers like navigate or like what their experience is or could potentially be with AI. And so we hope to, broaden this work to, I would say, include just like the general question of like, how is AI being made explainable for users, one, in the global south, and also two, who have, I would say, like low technology experience or literacy in this example. So yeah. And then in terms of I would say like plugging myself in my work, supporting me, definitely I would love to connect with people on LinkedIn. That's always a great way. And also like I guess in terms of forging collaborative research connections, that's something I'm really interested in doing, especially in I would say scaling my work to the African continent, just because I do have a direct connection there. So would love to, be involved with anyone, doing computer vision for health projects or just like I would say like AI ethics problems in general that are directed towards sub-Saharan Africa. So that's something I'm very interested in and going much further, going deeper into. And then also, so my Twitter is Chinasa Okolo. And then also you can check out more of my work and other links to like my, I guess, GitHub and other things on my website at chinasaokolo.com.
Okay, awesome. We really enjoyed having you, and thank you for coming to speak, and thank you for answering the audience's questions. It was really a lovely talk. Thank you.
Thank y'all for inviting me. I really appreciate it.